I'm here at the Caledon Equestrian Park in Toronto, Canada, home of the 2015 games, and I've had the good fortune to interview a good friend of mine, Dr. Tim Worden, and we'll be talking about exercise physiology for your horse, some of the technologies out there, some of his thoughts about how you can improve your training, some of the differences of the past, and some of the useful technology today that might be able to help you. So stay tuned and check it out. Thank you. So, Tim, what's your professional background, education, and how did you get connected to horses?
So I did ride as a kid. My dad's a veterinarian, so I grew up around animals, like definitely an animal lover. I rode until I got to high school, and then at that point, I started to look around, got a little bit jealous of all my friends playing some other sports, so stopped riding, started to focus more on football, and for the next little while, like that was really my focus. And then when I got to university, track and field and weightlifting were sort of things that I became really passionate about. Going through university, my undergrad was in biomedical science, so I finished that up. And as I went through that process, I started spending a lot more time in the library researching training theory. During my undergrad, I took a lot more human kinetics courses, maybe than biomedical science courses, and I just became really fascinated with the human body and how does it actually function? How do we integrate all the sensory information around us? How do we update our nervous system with the neural control? How we actually turn muscles on and off to generate the incredible athletic feats that humans can do. So very, very fortunate to meet up with what would be my advisor throughout my grad studies, Dr. Lorianne Vallis. And we started working on some projects together, mostly looking at obstacle avoidance. So how do humans update their stepping strategies to step over obstacles? And so I knew that's where I was going in grad school. I was taking a year off between undergrad and grad school and decided to get back to horses. Like I love being outside. I wanted to get away from academia for a little while. So went and worked as a groom. Very, very fortunate that I worked with who I did, like some really, I guess, forward thinking people, some really great stables. And that was sort of like what got me back into it. Started talking to a Canadian rider, Chris Sorensen, who at the time was riding on Canadian teams. And we started to talk about sports science and could we take all the data and all the information, all the research that's been done on human athletes across varying sports, and can we take some of that and apply it to horses? Ultimately, I think the genetic makeup of a horse versus a human is over 90% the same. So there are way more similarities than differences when you look at horses and humans. And so we started to play around a little bit with this as I was going through grad school. And I did all my grad school at University of Guelph with Dr. Vallis. And so that was really the, I guess, foundation of my expertise, quote unquote, was, the human sports training theory that I picked up, from my time, especially studying track and field and weightlifting, and then starting to make these connections within show jumping with Canadian team riders. I had the opportunity to do some consulting for Equestrian Canada when they had to develop a bit of a sports science program. So that was work collecting data on a lot of the Canadian team horses. So got to learn, what are the Canadian team horses at the top level doing day in and day out across different training programs. I consulted for a few different FEI riders. So for them, just again, looking at their daily training programs, trying to find those little tidbits of information that could give them a 1 or 2% advantage over their competitors. Because, if you have 1 or 2% and you get that in a few different areas, then maybe you're now 5% better off than you were before. So that was really informative. I just worked with some really great people, learned a lot in that process, and just kind of carried that forward. I still do some consulting work with a few different riders around the globe now. And as well, I have a full-time job at a hospital in Toronto studying spinal cord injury. So I kind of have my foot in a few different areas right now, but I really enjoy just having that process and being able to connect what I learn in different fields. I think that's ultimately, how we innovate and how we grow and how we get better is just talking to different people with different areas of expertise, taking what you can use and moving training programs forward.
What do you think, based on your experience, horse owners are doing right insofar as fitness and training for their horses?
Yeah, so I think we do a lot right. And I will say, like, it's cool to study the history of horse training. Like, you go back and you look at some of those, like, classic textbooks that were written, from the cavalry's perspective when you're trying to get horses essentially ready for battle and being responsive to what they needed to do out on the field. And I think like a lot of that like developed over hundreds and hundreds of years is very correct. And it is cool to see like how that developed and how that grew. I think as well, to a large extent, trainers and riders really understand the principles of training. So things like progressive overload. Obviously you don't go from 0 to 100 right away. Like you want to build your horse up to different movements or to different heights of fences. Things like building training programs that are customized to individual horses. You need to be somewhat specific in your training program. You want to have a foundation. All of those principles, I think we're pretty good at that. And I think as well, I think that riders and trainers are pretty good at setting like overarching goals for horses. And I think especially the top stables, usually they're achievable, which is obviously very important when you're setting goals.
What would you say horse owners are doing wrong? Where's there room for improvement?
I think this is a tough question to answer. It's so specific. I think, again, like a lot of stables do a lot right, but every stable may have a few different weaknesses depending on things like facilities, their access to certain staff and resources, just the horses that are coming through, and maybe the goals of the riders. I think, and I think the sport is getting better, and we're seeing a bit more of a return to an increased focus on welfare. But I think maybe not prioritizing things like turnouts and just the overall welfare of the horses, making sure they can see their peers, maybe group turnout, like if it's safe to do so. Like having paddocks that are big enough that they can actually go out and move their bodies as they need to and run a little bit if they need to. Like I think that those are just common gaps, and like I appreciate some of it is just related to like the facilities and the infrastructure that people have. Um, I think as well, there's sometimes an over reliance on the equipment aspect of training to think that, just using a different bit or, different boots or whatever will correct whatever issue your horse is having. I think that often those are short term fixes because they are very different stimuli. You add it into the training program. It's something the horse hasn't experienced or is unfamiliar with, and you're going to get a strong response. But I think, again, like you look at over time, like those effects tend to wash out. You end up back where you are. So I think there needs to be a bit more of a focus on just the simple aspect of training, like breaking things down to the basics of what does the horse actually need to do to move well, to complete the sport well, and then trying to figure out like what can you do in training with exercises to be very deliberate in, giving a horse, maybe a 3 or 4 week course of certain training exercises, and then you assess, did those actually allow the horse to get stronger in certain areas so they move differently? And if not, then you reevaluate and move forward instead of always looking for that quick fix, which is often, equipment or supplements or whatever.
What's a common misconception regarding equine fitness, exercise, and training? Common misconception.
Yeah, I can think of a few. I would say the one that comes up a lot, maybe not so much now as it did before, but the idea that like that long, slow exercise is ultimately what you need to build a foundation for your horse to have successful in sport. But I think you still see that a lot from trainers. That a little bit the hesitancy to increase the velocity the horses train at home and to open them up a little bit. And trainers will say, they're a little bit concerned that they're going to lose the mind of the horse if it gets going too quickly, or they feel like they just can't accomplish as much at a higher velocity versus a low velocity. And for sure, like coming back to progressive overload, you want to make sure the horse is ready to handle some velocity. But I think ultimately, if you have a horse that is at a high level and you're sort of pursuing like that next step, you need to expose it to some velocity at home. So that's for sure getting up above ring speed, getting them comfortable handling those large forces. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to try to win a jump off, or if you're going to ask your horse to leave a little bit long, or if it's going to need, or if the horse needs to, fit in a stride maybe there was where there isn't enough room, like it's going to have to generate forces that are way greater than the average canter stride or gallop stride. And that's when training at those higher velocities is going to do that. There's some good research out there, from Michigan State University and others, demonstrating that just getting the horse up to some higher velocities once a week even can give you better bone quality in young horses, can help with tendon and ligament and all the other soft tissue structures. So like I would say that that's one misconception that I wish would, move on a little bit.
Give me like one specific exercise that you would say if somebody has a horse, it's in training, this is not something that they do. Okay, I would introduce X into your weekly workout, going along the lines of the higher velocity.
Yeah, so and again, it is dependent on the facilities you have and the infrastructure that you do have. Like if you've got like a good grass field with a good footing, like that's a good place to go and do it. Or if you do have, if you're fortunate enough to have access to a gallop track, like that's obviously a great place to do it. But you want to start out just getting the horse up to a bit more speed than you typically do. So like let's say that 450 meters a minute is the fastest you'd ever go in the ring, like let's just say, then maybe try to get up closer to 500 meters a minute and just do that for 45 seconds. Bring the horse back to a walk if it's a minute or two, and then go again. And ultimately, like you're just trying to set a threshold at this point as to how much work the horse can do before it fatigues. And you, as the rider, are responsible for just judging, how's their body feeling. Like the stride, if the horse starts to really get on its forehand and you feel like it's really struggling, like that's a good sign to right cut the work out down. Like maybe you got in 3 reps at 45 seconds galloping at 500 meters a minute, and then you're going to use that as your baseline, and you'll build from that every week. So maybe you'll try to bring it out to 60 seconds per rep, and then once you can do that 3 times, drop it back down to 45 seconds. Now go up to 4 reps, and then go from there. And it really just depends on your individual horse, like how much time it needs to recover. There's no point in doing a gallop set if the horse is still huffing and puffing from the last one. So you're just reading all of those different things as the rider and trying to figure out, what is your horse capable of now, and then to just build from there.
Okay. Talking about, along those lines, right? So, this is a great example because we're at least this ring behind us is the hunter ring. There's this desire to get these horses quiet before they show. So there's a lunging that goes on and lunging that goes on. And at some point, I mean, again, rudimentary, the horse is going to strengthen from all the lunging, so it's going to require more lunging. Would that be fair to say that prepping the horses, is there a better way to prep horses to be quiet, do you think? Or is it sort of this old school way of just lunging them till they're tired to get some sort of a specific frame or look?
Yeah, it's a good question. Um, Probably the most controversial one that you gave me. Uh, no, it's all good. Yeah, it's a good question for sure, and like I agree with you that it becomes a vicious cycle trying to get these horses more calm, right? Because the more you lunge them, especially if you get them up to a gallop at the lunge, like they're working pretty hard in the mornings, and then they're going to get fitter from that. Their bodies are going to adapt to that. So then, as you look at a 4 month season or a 5 month season, you're going to need to do way more towards the end of the season than you did at the start. Um, I think that with respect to like how do you best deal with that, it really depends on what the horse can tolerate. Um, there were times when I was grooming hunters where, I, I feel like I can say this now because it's 15 years ago. Like there would be times where I was instructed to go out and, to really get after the horse on the lunge, like to really work it out. And sometimes I would just take the horse for a casual walk around the horse park, because like ultimately what you're looking to do is to create a situation where that horse is in a good state of mind, like it's relaxed. It's not going to react in the ring, and there are sort of two ways to accomplish that. It is either to like absolutely drain the nervous system, or to try to put the nervous system in a place of ease. To drain the nervous system with lunging is ultimately like the more effective way to do it, because the horse is never really going to wake up from that and come to a reactive. But on the flip side, you are exposing it to a lot more work than the horse needs to do, and you're just increasing the risk of injury. Um, I know there are some of those like legal calming pastes and so on that people swear by, but I would maybe just wonder if like the sport could shift a little bit into trying to figure out like what each horse needs in the morning to become more relaxed, and then ultimately, if you have a horse that is really hard to get relaxed without like just a quick lunge or taking it for a hand walk, it's one of those things where like maybe it's not meant to be in the hunter ring.
Right.
Yeah, that's a tough question. Like it's it's a controversial one.
Most Olympic sports and the connected athletes have strictly monitored programs. However, equine sports still tend to be antiquated with techniques and training principles. Would you say that's a fair statement?
Yeah, I think it's a fair statement. I think that equestrian sports are getting better. Think especially if you look at what's going on in thoroughbred racing right now. Like you're seeing a huge investment from these top trainers in wearable technology to monitor their athletes. They're using video a lot more aggressively than they did in the past, just to look for subtle movement characteristics. They're using things like the Sleep app, the monitoring app, just to measure like any asymmetries in the horse's movements as a potential early warning sign that something is not quite right with the horse, so that that can be addressed before it turns into a major issue. Um, I would say that in equestrian sports, just the way it's structured, I think there are a few reasons as to why it hasn't progressed maybe as quickly as some people would like. I think one of the major issues is just the hierarchy of the stable. Like the people really who are the best positioned to direct what training a horse is ready for, because they know the horses so well, and they see, you know, the horse may be a bit fatigued today and they have a good sense of how the horse's body is responding, isn't so much the trainers, it's more so the staff in the stable, so usually the grooms. And I think just that classic stable hierarchy, they maybe weren't given the voice that they needed. Conversely, if you look at the best programs in the world, you see really good communication between those grooms and those riders. And I think that's ultimately, like if someone talks about a secret sauce as to why, you know, a Ken Farrington or a McLean Ward or a Henrik von Eckermann or whoever, why they're so successful, I think that communication piece is absolutely massive. And I think as well, it's such a it's such an industry that's always go go go, as you know, Jude. And so I think that the last thing sometimes people want to do at the end of the day is to sit down and try to go through some data and go through some monitoring. And that's again why some of these AI technologies and machine learning technologies are so exciting for sport. Just like what Slate was able to do with their AI asymmetry recognition platform with iPhones, I think that there will be no new programs that come along very soon that will give trainers, you know, helpful triggers and insights into when things change with horses that will allow them to adapt training programs. But again, it requires good information being put in,
Mm,
and that's going to come from the staff primarily, in my opinion.
okay. Do you feel that owners seem resistant to the new technology and training principles, especially if they can be proven beneficial? Is there a resistance, do you think? Or
I'm not sure it's a conscious resistance. I think that the way the sport has evolved, and especially in North America, the way it's structured, it very much so is a service industry, right? Where a lot of these owners and amateur riders are showing up to the stable. Um, they're very successful in other facets of their life, and showing up to the stable is a way for them to sort of escape and to spend time with their horses and to focus on developing their horses in a certain way. So I think oftentimes they just want to get to the stable, they want to spend time with their horse, and they're relying on their trainer to best guide them as to, you know, what are the ideal ways to do that, to communicate with your horse, to train them, to get them to perform better. So I don't think it's a conscious reluctance. I think it's more so they're pulling from the information they have available, and they don't really have the time or the energy or the resources to go out and to search this information outside of the stable.